The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the quiet suburban neighborhood. It was one of those rare days when Captain Laura Hayes could finally take a break from her demanding duties as an officer in the United States Space Force. She stood outside her modest home, wearing casual clothes and gloves, sweeping leaves and bits of broken branches that had scattered across her yard after last night's storm. The air smelled fresh, tinged with the earthy scent of wet soil. For once, there were no urgent calls or pressing missions to attend to. Just peace. Laura paused for a moment, leaning on her broom and looking around. Her house wasn't grand. It was small but cozy, with white walls and blue shutters. But it meant everything to her. Buying this place years ago had been a dream come true. After rising through the ranks despite countless obstacles, she saw owning this home as proof that she belonged here just like anyone else. But even now, standing amidst the calm beauty of her surroundings, she couldn't shake off the feeling that some people still didn't think so. Her thoughts drifted back to her career. Being a woman, and not just any woman, but someone who looked different from most of her peers, had always made things harder. There were whispers behind closed doors, doubters who thought she'd never make it far. Some openly questioned whether she deserved her promotions, yet Laura had proven them wrong time and again. She earned every stripe on her uniform through sheer determination and skill. Still, moments like these, when she let herself relax, reminded her how exhausting it sometimes felt to constantly have to prove herself. A sound broke her reverie. Footsteps crunched on the gravel path leading up to her driveway. Laura turned to see two men approaching her property. They were dressed in plain clothes, neither wearing uniforms nor badges visible at first glance. One of them walked ahead, his posture confident, almost arrogant. He stopped just short of her fence while the second man lingered a few steps behind, his hand resting suspiciously close to something tucked into his belt. "Can I help you?" Laura asked politely, setting down her broom and stepping closer to the gate. She kept her voice steady, though something about their demeanor made her uneasy. The man in front gave her a quick once-over before speaking. "You're Laura Hayes?" His tone wasn't friendly. It was more like an accusation than a question. "That's me," she replied, keeping her expression neutral. "What can I do for you?" He introduced himself as Officer Greg Miller, nodding toward his companion, who remained silent. "This is my partner, Steve Roberts. We've received reports that your property might be encroaching on government land." Laura frowned. Encroaching? That didn't make sense. She'd bought this house legally, gone through all the proper channels. No one had ever mentioned anything about government land before. "I'm sorry, but that doesn't sound right," she said calmly. "I have all the paperwork showing I own this property outright. Would you like to see it?" Greg exchanged a glance with Steve, then smirked. "Paperwork can be faked," he said dismissively. "We'll need to verify it ourselves." Something about the way he said it set off alarm bells in Laura's mind. This wasn't normal procedure. If they were legitimate officers, they would have shown identification by now. And why were they so fixated on her property? None of this added up. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her tablet, pulling up digital copies of her ownership documents. As she handed it over, Greg barely glanced at the screen. Instead, he began pacing along the edge of her yard, pointing at random spots and muttering under his breath. Steve stayed where he was, his eyes locked onto her, his hand still, hovering near whatever he carried at his side. Laura tried reasoning with them. "Look, if there's really an issue, we can sort it out properly. You don't need to act like you don't get to tell us what we need to do," Greg interrupted sharply, cutting her off mid-sentence. His tone shifted, becoming colder, angrier. "People like you shouldn't even be living here." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. "People like you." She knew exactly what he meant. It wasn't just about her property anymore. It was about her, about who she was. Laura took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay composed. Losing her temper wouldn't help. "Not now. I don't know what you're implying," she said evenly. "But I suggest you leave unless you have actual evidence to back up your claims." Greg laughed, a harsh mocking sound. "Evidence? Oh, we've got plenty of evidence. Don't worry, we'll deal with you soon enough." He turned to Steve, jerking his head toward the house. Check inside. Make sure nothing illegal's going on in there. That was when Steve moved. In one fluid motion, he stepped forward and drew his gun, aiming it directly at Laura. Her heart skipped a beat. This wasn't happening. Not here, not now. She raised her hand slowly, palms facing outward, showing she wasn't a threat. "What are you doing?" she demanded, trying to keep her voice steady despite the fear bubbling beneath the surface. "This is ridiculous. I haven't done anything wrong." Steve didn't respond. His finger hovered dangerously close to the trigger, his gaze unwavering. Behind him, Greg watched with a smug grin, clearly enjoying the power dynamic unfolding. Before him, Laura's mind raced. She needed to de-escalate the situation somehow. These men weren't acting like real law enforcement. They were bullies, using intimidation to assert control. But she also knew better than to underestimate them. Whatever their motives, they clearly had no intention of leaving peacefully. As Greg continued barking orders, Laura subtly activated the distress signal embedded in her wristwatch. It was a tiny device, almost invisible, designed specifically for situations like this. A faint vibration confirmed it was working. Help would come, if she could hold out until then. For now, she focused on staying alive. Keeping her movements slow and deliberate, she spoke again. "If you have a problem with me, fine. But this isn't the way to handle it. You're making a mistake," Greg sneered. "No, the mistake was letting someone like you rise above your station. Don't think we don't know what you've been working on. Projects like yours, and they're dangerous, unnatural." Laura's stomach churned. So this wasn't just personal, it was political. Somehow these men knew about her involvement in classified military projects. Projects that pushed boundaries, challenged old ways of thinking. Projects that some people feared. But she couldn't dwell on that now. All she could do was keep talking, keep stalling, and hope that backup arrived in time. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Each second dragged by with agonizing slowness. Greg paced back and forth, spouting hateful rhetoric while Steve kept his weapon trained on her. Laura's muscles tensed, ready to react if either man made a sudden move. But she forced herself to remain outwardly calm, projecting an image of strength even as doubt gnawed at her resolve. Just when it seemed like the standoff might drag on forever, the distant rumble of an engine broke the tension. A sleek black vehicle sped down the street, screeching to a halt beside Laura's driveway. Out stepped Major Daniel Carter, flanked by Lieutenant Emily Ross. Both wore their military uniforms, exuding authority and confidence. Daniel's sharp gaze swept over the scene, taking in Greg and Steve's aggressive postures, the gun pointed at Laura. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his voice firm and commanding. Greg faltered for a moment, caught off guard by the unexpected arrival, but he quickly recovered, attempting to assert dominance. "This is none of your concern, Major. We're conducting official business." Daniel arched an eyebrow. "Official business? Funny, because neither of you has identified yourselves properly, and threatening a senior officer certainly doesn't qualify as official." He stepped closer, positioning himself between Laura and Steve's weapon. "Lower your gun. Now." For a moment, it looked like Steve might refuse. His grip tightened on the weapon, his jaw clenched. But then Greg muttered something under his breath, and reluctantly, Steve lowered the gun. Laura let out a shaky breath, lowering her hands. Relief washed over her, though she knew the situation was far from resolved. Daniel and Emily approached her, offering quiet reassurance. "Are you okay?" Daniel asked, his tone softening slightly. She nodded, though her legs felt weak. "Yeah, thanks for coming." Daniel gave her a grim smile. "We'll talk about it later. Right now, let's deal with these two." And with that, the confrontation shifted. Greg and Steve found themselves on the defensive, scrambling to justify their actions. But Laura knew this wasn't over. Not yet. Whatever agenda these men were pursuing, it ran deeper than a simple property dispute, and she intended to find out exactly what they were hiding. The tension in Laura's yard hung thick, like a storm cloud refusing to break. Greg and Steve stood frozen, their earlier bravado crumbling under the weight of Daniel's commanding presence. Major Daniel Carter was not a man to be trifled with. His reputation for integrity and leadership within the military was well known. Standing beside him was Lieutenant Emily Ross, her sharp eyes scanning the scene with precision. Together, they radiated authority, making it clear that Greg and Steve were out of their depth. Daniel crossed his arms over his chest, his expression unreadable but intimidating. "I asked you a question," he said, his voice low but firm. "What exactly is going on here?" Greg stammered, trying to regain control of the situation. We're investigating a potential violation of government property laws. This woman," he gestured toward Laura, his tone dripping with disdain. "She's squatting on restricted land." Laura clenched her fists at her sides, resisting the urge to snap back. She knew better than to let her emotions take over. Instead, she focused on Daniel and Emily, trusting them to handle this. Daniel raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Restricted land? That's interesting, because I've reviewed Captain Hayes's property records myself, and there's no mention of any such restrictions. Care to explain how you came to this conclusion?" Steve shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Greg for guidance. But Greg, though visibly shaken, wasn't ready to back down. "Look, Major, we don't have to justify ourselves to you. We're just doing our job." "Your job?" Emily interjected, stepping forward. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that made both men flinch. Pointing a gun at a decorated officer isn't anyone's job. In fact, it sounds more like harassment, or worse. Greg's face reddened, whether from anger or embarrassment, it was hard to tell. "This has nothing to do with rank or titles. It's about protecting our interests. People like her shouldn't be trusted with sensitive projects." The words hit Laura like a slap. She opened her mouth to respond, but Daniel held up a hand, silently signaling her to stay quiet. He turned his attention back to Greg, his tone icy. "People like her? What does that even mean? Are you referring to her gender, her ethnicity, or is it because she's smarter and more capable than you'll ever be?" Greg sputtered, caught off guard by the directness of the accusation. "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" Emily cut in, her voice rising slightly. "Because it sure sounds like you're implying something ugly. And if that's the case, you'd better start explaining yourselves before this gets escalated further." For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint rustle of leaves stirred by a cool breeze. Greg and Steve exchanged uneasy glances, realizing they were losing ground fast. Whatever confidence they'd had earlier had evaporated under the scrutiny of two seasoned military officers. Finally, Greg cleared his throat and straightened his posture, attempting to salvage some semblance of authority. "Fine, if you want to play it this way, go ahead. But don't say we didn't warn you. Projects like Eclipse are dangerous. They put humanity at risk." Laura's heart skipped a beat. How did they know about Eclipse? The project was classified, known only to a select few within the military. Even Daniel and Emily weren't fully briefed on its details. Yet these two men, a pair of rogue officers with questionable motives, seemed to know enough to use it as leverage. Daniel's expression darkened. "Enough, you're done here. Get off this property before I have you both detained for misconduct." Greg hesitated, his jaw tightening. For a brief second, it looked like he might argue, but then he muttered something under his breath and motioned for Steve to follow him. As they walked away, Greg shot Laura one last glare over his shoulder. "This isn't over," he said, his voice laced with venom. Once they were out of sight, Laura finally allowed herself to exhale. Her legs felt weak, and she sank onto the steps leading up to her porch, resting her elbows on her knees. Daniel and Emily joined her, their expressions grim. "You okay?" Daniel asked, crouching down to meet her gaze. Laura nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. "Yeah, thanks for showing up when you did. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't." Emily placed a reassuring hand on Laura's shoulder. "You did great. You stayed calm and handled yourself exactly the way you were trained." "Too. But we need to figure out what's really going on here. Those guys weren't acting alone." Laura sighed, rubbing her temples. "I know. They mentioned Eclipse. That means someone leaked information about the project, and whoever sent them, they're targeting me specifically. Daniel frowned, deep in thought. This goes beyond personal animosity. Someone wants to send a message to you, and maybe to anyone else involved in Eclipse. We can't ignore that. Emily nodded in agreement. We should report this immediately. Let command know what happened. Maybe they can trace who these guys are working for. Laura hesitated, staring at the ground. Reporting the incident was the logical next step, but part of her worried about drawing too much attention. If word got out that she'd been threatened, it could undermine her credibility, or worse, put others in danger. Still, she knew keeping quiet wasn't an option. All right, she said finally. Let's report it. But first, I think we need to dig deeper, find out who's behind this. If they're willing to intimidate me openly, they won't stop until they get what they want. Daniel stood, offering her a hand to help her up. Agreed. We'll start by running background checks on those two, see if we can connect them to anyone higher up. And in the meantime, stick close to us. Don't go anywhere alone. Laura accepted his hand, pulling herself to her feet. Thanks, I appreciate it. As they headed inside, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Whoever was pulling the strings had resources, connections, and a clear agenda. And while she didn't know all the details yet, one thing was certain. They were playing a dangerous game, a game where the stakes were far greater than her career or even her life. Back at the military base later that evening, Daniel and Emily worked tirelessly to piece together the puzzle. Using access codes, provided by Laura, they delved into classified databases searching for any mention of Greg Miller and Steve Roberts. What they found was disturbing. Both men had ties to a shadowy organization known as the Vanguard League, a group infamous for its anti-progressivist views and ties to xenophobic movements within certain branches of law enforcement. The League operated in secrecy, using fear and misinformation to push its agenda. Its members believed that advancements in technology and cooperation with extraterrestrial allies posed a threat to human autonomy. But what shocked Laura most was the extent of the League's reach. According to the files, several high-ranking officials in various government agencies were suspected of having links to the group. If true, it meant that the conspiracy against her, and against Eclipse, went far deeper than she'd imagined. This is bad, Emily murmured, scrolling through the data on her tablet. Really bad. If the League's involved, this isn't just about stopping a single project, it's about dismantling everything we've been working toward. Laura leaned back in her chair, pinching the bridge of her nose. So what do we do? Go public? Expose them? Daniel shook his head. Not yet. We don't have enough evidence. Going public without proof would only give them ammunition to discredit us. For now, we need to gather intel, figure out their endgame, and protect ourselves, Laura added quietly. Because if they're willing to target me, they won't hesitate to come after anyone else standing in their way. The room fell, silent as the weight of the situation settled over them. They were facing an enemy that thrived in the shadows, manipulating events from behind the scenes. Taking them down wouldn't be easy, but Laura knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to back down. Not now, not ever. Over the next few days, Laura threw herself into preparing for whatever came next. With Daniel and Emily's help, she reviewed security protocols, tightened access to sensitive information, and began discreetly reaching out to trusted allies within the military. Slowly but surely, they built a network of support, determined to fight back against the forces arrayed against them. Still, the memory of that day lingered in Laura's mind. The fear, the anger, the realization that her battles extended far beyond the battlefield. But she also remembered something else, the strength she'd found in herself, and the unwavering loyalty of her friends. Together, they were a formidable team. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them head-on. Because in the end, Laura Hayes wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for a future where everyone, regardless of gender, race, or background, could stand, tall and proud. A future worth protecting no matter the cost. The days following the confrontation at Laura's house were a blur of activity. Major Daniel Carter and Lieutenant Emily Ross worked tirelessly to unravel the mystery surrounding Greg Miller, Steve Roberts, and their connection to the Vanguard League. Laura, though shaken, refused to let fear dictate her actions. Instead, she channeled her energy into preparing for the inevitable next move from their shadowy adversaries. Daniel took the lead on investigating the backgrounds of the two men. Using classified tools and databases only accessible to high-ranking officers, he uncovered a web of connections that stretched far beyond what any of them had anticipated. Greg and Steve weren't just rogue enforcers, they were pawns in a much larger game. Their ties to the Vanguard League ran deep, linking them to influential figures within government agencies and private corporations. It became clear that this wasn't a random act of intimidation. It was part of a calculated campaign to undermine projects like Eclipse. Meanwhile, Emily focused on securing Laura's safety. She installed advanced surveillance systems around Laura's property, including motion sensors and cameras disguised as ordinary objects. "If anyone tries to come near you again," Emily said, adjusting a small device hidden in a garden gnome, "we'll know about it before they even step onto your lawn." Laura appreciated the effort but couldn't shake the feeling that these measures were temporary solutions. The real threat wasn't physical, it was ideological. The Vanguard League wasn't just targeting individuals, they were attacking progress itself. Every advancement in technology, every step toward cooperation with alien species, represented a shift away from the old ways of thinking. And for groups like the League, that shift was unacceptable. One evening, after hours spent poring over data, Daniel called a meeting in a secure conference room at the base. Laura and Emily joined him, each carrying stacks of documents and digital files. The room was dimly lit, the hum of fluorescent lights barely audible over the quiet tension in the air. "All right," Daniel began, spreading out maps and diagrams on the table. "Here's what we know so far. Greg and Steve are low-level operatives, but they're connected to someone higher up in the League. This person or people is pulling the strings. Our job is to figure out who that is." Emily nodded, pointing to a cluster of names highlighted on one of the documents. "These individuals stand out. They've all been linked to anti-progressivist movements in the past. Some have even made public statements opposing projects like Eclipse. If I had to guess, I'd say one of them is behind this." Laura leaned forward, studying the names. Each one sent a chill down her spine. These weren't ordinary citizens or fringe activists. They were powerful people with access to resources and influence. Taking them down wouldn't be easy. "What's our plan?" she asked, looking at Daniel. Daniel hesitated, his expression grim. "We need to dig deeper, find evidence that ties them directly to the League. But we also need to protect ourselves. If they realize we're onto them, they'll strike back, and they won't hold back." Laura clenched her fists under the table. "I'm not backing down, not now. Whatever it takes, we expose them." Emily placed a reassuring hand on Laura's arm. "We're with you, all the way. But we have to be smart about this. One wrong move, and we could lose everything." Over the next few days, the trio devised a strategy. They would split their efforts. Daniel would focus on gathering intelligence through official channels, using his rank and clearance to access restricted files. Emily would handle covert operations, setting up sting operations and monitoring communications for signs of suspicious activity. Laura, meanwhile, would act as bait. The idea made her stomach churn, but she understood the logic. The League had already targeted her once. If they believed she was vulnerable, they might reveal more of their plans. "I'll do it," she said firmly when Daniel proposed the plan. "But only if we have safeguards in place. I'm not walking into this blind." Daniel agreed, promising to keep a close eye on her movements. He assigned a team of trusted operatives to monitor her, remotely, ensuring she was never truly alone. Emily equipped her with additional gadgets, including a panic button disguised as a bracelet and a cloaking device that could temporarily mask her presence from surveillance drones. Despite the precautions, Laura couldn't ignore the gnawing sense of unease that followed her everywhere. She went about her daily routine, working at the base, meeting with colleagues, and occasionally returning home, but her mind was always alert, scanning for threats. It was exhausting, living in a constant state of vigilance. Yet she knew it was necessary. One afternoon, while reviewing data in her office, Laura received an unexpected visitor. Colonel Alan Brooks, a senior officer known for his conservative views, entered without knocking. His presence immediately put her on edge. Brooks had always been critical of progressive initiatives within the military, often dismissing them as reckless or unnecessary. Seeing him here, uninvited, felt like a bad omen. "Captain Hayes," he greeted her, his tone polite but cold. "May I have a word?" Laura gestured toward the chair across from her desk. "Of course, sir. What can I do for you?" Brooks sat down, crossing one leg over the other. He studied her for a moment, his piercing gaze making her feel like she was under a microscope. "I hear there's been some trouble recently concerning your property." Her heart skipped a beat, but she kept her expression neutral. "Yes, sir. There was an incident involving two unidentified individuals claiming to represent law enforcement. It's being investigated." Brooks nodded slowly, as if weighing her words. "Indeed, such incidents are troubling, especially when they involve someone of your stature." He paused, leaning forward slightly. "Tell me, Captain, do you believe you're being targeted because of your work on Eclipse?" Laura hesitated. Brooks's question felt like a trap, but avoiding it entirely might raise suspicions. "It's possible," she admitted cautiously. "The project has its share of critics, but I don't think it's wise to jump to conclusions." Brooks smirked, a flicker of amusement passing over his face. "Ah, diplomacy. Always admirable, but perhaps misplaced in this case." He stood abruptly, smoothing out his uniform. "Be careful, Captain. Not everyone shares your vision for the future. Some see it as a threat to humanity itself." With that cryptic warning, he turned and left, leaving Laura staring after him in stunned silence. His words echoed in her mind long after he was gone. Was he warning her or threatening her? Either way, it was clear that Brooks knew more than he was letting on. That night, Laura shared the encounter with Daniel and Emily during another late-night meeting. Both listened intently, their expressions growing darker with each detail. "He's testing you," Daniel said finally. "Seeing how you react, trying to gauge whether you suspect him." Emily frowned, tapping her pen against the table. "Which means he's either involved or knows who is. Either way, he's dangerous." Laura sighed, rubbing her temples. "So, what do we do? Confront him? Report him?" "Neither," Daniel replied firmly. "Not yet. We need concrete evidence before we make a move. For now, play along. Act like you're oblivious. Let him underestimate you." The advice made sense, but it didn't make Laura feel any better. Playing along meant pretending to trust someone who clearly had ulterior motives. It meant walking, a tightrope with no safety net. Yet she knew Daniel was right. Acting impulsively would only give Brooks and his allies the upper hand. As the days passed, Laura continued her charade, maintaining a facade of normalcy while secretly documenting every interaction with Brooks and others who seemed suspicious. She attended meetings, filed reports, and participated in training exercises, all the while keeping her ears open for clues. Slowly but surely, patterns began to emerge. One name kept coming up: Project Shadow Veil. It was mentioned in passing during conversations between senior officers, whispered in hushed tones during briefings. No one offered explanations, and attempts to dig deeper yielded nothing but dead ends. Whatever Shadow Veil was, it was shrouded in secrecy, and Laura couldn't shake the feeling that it was connected to the League. Her suspicions were confirmed when Emily intercepted a fragment of encrypted communication. Decoding it revealed references to both Eclipse and Shadow Veil, along with instructions to neutralize key personnel. The message was unsigned, but the implications were clear. "They're planning something big," Emily said, showing the decoded text to Laura. "And Daniel. And they're not wasting time." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then neither can we. It's time to escalate." Together, they formulated a new plan. Using the intel they'd gathered, they identified a potential weak link in the League's network: a mid-level operative named Ryan Cole. Unlike Greg and Steve, Cole wasn't completely loyal to the cause. He had debts, personal issues, and a reputation for cutting corners. If anyone could be turned, it was him. The operation to recruit Cole required precision and subtlety. Laura, Daniel, and Emily coordinated carefully, setting up a fake scenario designed to lure him into revealing information. They staged a mock arrest, making it appear as though Cole had been caught red-handed during an illegal transaction. When he realized the gravity of his situation, they offered him a deal: cooperate or face charges that would destroy his life. With Ryan Cole's information in hand, Laura, Daniel, and Emily knew they had to act fast. The Vanguard League wasn't just planning to sabotage Eclipse, they were preparing for something much bigger. According to Cole, the League had infiltrated a remote orbital station disguised as a research facility. It was there that they intended to repurpose components of the Eclipse system into a weapon capable of suppressing descent across Earth. The stakes were enormous. If the League succeeded, they could manipulate global communications, suppress free speech, and enforce their twisted vision of humanity's future. For Laura, this wasn't just about stopping an enemy. It was about protecting the values she believed in: freedom, equality, and progress. Failure wasn't an option. The trio gathered in a secure briefing room at the base, surrounded by maps, schematics, and digital projections of the orbital station. Laura stood at the head of the table, her expression resolute. "We have one shot at this," she said, addressing Daniel and Emily. "If we fail, the consequences will be catastrophic." Daniel nodded, his voice steady. "Agreed. But we'll need more than just the three of us. This is going to take precision and teamwork." Emily chimed in, pointing to a holographic display of the station. "Intel shows the station has automated defenses, rogue operatives, and heavy surveillance. We'll need to move quietly and strike strategically, no mistakes." Laura took a deep breath, steeling herself for what lay ahead. "Then let's get started. We don't have time to waste." The operation began with meticulous planning. Using data from Ryan Cole, the team mapped out every corridor, security checkpoint, and potential hazard within the orbital station. They identified key areas where the League had set up their operations, including a central control room where the modified Eclipse components were being assembled. Their mission was clear: infiltrate the station, disable the weapon, and expose the League's plans to the world. To ensure success, they recruited a small, trusted team of specialists. Among them was Sergeant Jake Morgan, an expert in stealth tactics, and technician Lisa Park, who specialized in hacking advanced systems. Together, the group prepared for the mission, running simulations and practicing combat drills until they were confident in their ability to execute the plan. On the day of the operation, the team boarded a covert spacecraft designed for rapid deployment. As the ship ascended into orbit, Laura sat quietly, staring out the window at the curve of the Earth below. She thought about everything that had led her to this moment: the threats, the fear, the sacrifices. But she also thought about the people counting on her: her colleagues, her friends, and the countless others who believed in a better future. She couldn't let them down. When the spacecraft docked with the orbital station, the team moved swiftly and silently. Dressed in black tactical gear and equipped with state-of-the-art tools, they slipped through airlocks and maintenance tunnels, avoiding detection. Laura led the way, her training guiding each step. Every sound, every shadow, was a potential threat, but she remained focused, trusting her instincts and her team. Their first obstacle came in the form of automated drones patrolling the corridors. These machines were programmed to detect intruders and respond with lethal force. Lisa worked quickly, using her hacking device to override their systems and render them inert. "Clear," she whispered, giving the team the signal to proceed. As they advanced deeper into the station, the tension grew palpable. The hum of machinery filled the air, mingling with the faint echoes of distant footsteps. At one point, they encountered a group of League operatives guarding a restricted area. Jake took charge, using non-lethal methods to neutralize the guards without raising alarms. "Move fast," he urged, keeping watch while the others slipped past. Finally, they reached the central control room. Inside, Technicians worked feverishly to complete the modifications to the Eclipse system. Monitors displayed streams of code and schematics revealing the weapon's devastating capabilities. Laura felt a surge of anger but pushed it aside. There would be time for emotions later. Right now they had a job to do. "Lisa, start disabling the system," Laura instructed, taking position near the door. "Jake, keep an eye out for reinforcements. Emily, you're with me. We'll cover the exits." Lisa immediately got to work, her fingers flying over a portable console as she interfaced with the station's mainframe. Lines of code scrolled across her screen as she attempted to dismantle the League's programming. Meanwhile, Laura and Emily kept watch, ready to defend the team if anyone tried to interfere. It wasn't long before trouble arrived. A squad of League operatives stormed into the control room, weapons drawn. "Freeze!" one of them shouted, aiming directly at Laura. Without hesitation, Laura raised her hands, buying time for Lisa to finish her task. "You don't want to do this," she said calmly, her voice steady despite the danger. "This isn't your fight." The lead operative sneered. "Oh, but it is. People like you always think you know what's best for humanity. Well, guess what? Humanity doesn't need your so-called progress. It needs order." Emily stepped forward, her tone sharp. "Order? You call tyranny order? What you're doing is enslaving people, stripping away their freedom. That's not order. It's oppression." The exchange gave Lisa the precious seconds she needed. With a final keystroke, she completed the shutdown sequence. Alarms blared throughout the station as the weapon powered down, its systems rendered useless. "Done!" Lisa exclaimed, standing up triumphantly. Chaos erupted as the operatives realized their plan had been thwarted. Shots rang out, and the team scrambled for cover. Laura and Emily returned fire, using precise shots to incapacitate their attackers without causing fatalities. Jake provided backup, ensuring no one slipped past their defenses. Amid the chaos, Laura spotted a familiar face among the operatives, Colonel Alan Brooks. He stood near the back of the room, his expression livid. "You've ruined everything," he snarled, drawing his weapon. Laura locked eyes with him, her resolve unwavering. "No, Colonel. You did that yourself. Your hatred and fear blinded you. Humanity deserves better." Brooks hesitated, his grip tightening on the gun. For a moment it seemed like he might shoot, but then Jake tackled him from behind, disarming him before he could act. "That's enough," Jake growled, pinning him to the ground. With Brooks subdued and the weapon disabled, the team regrouped. Exhausted but victorious, they secured the control room and called for reinforcements to detain the remaining operatives. As the dust settled, Laura allowed herself a brief moment of relief. They had done it. They had stopped the League's plan. But as she looked around at the destruction caused by the firefight, she knew the battle wasn't truly over. The Vanguard League was just one piece of a larger puzzle, and exposing their actions would require courage and determination. Still, for the first time in days, Laura felt hope. Hope that the truth would prevail, and that humanity could choose a path forward together. Back on Earth, the aftermath of the mission unfolded rapidly. Evidence collected from the orbital station painted a damning picture of the League's activities. High-ranking officials implicated in the conspiracy were arrested, and public outrage mounted as the extent of their betrayal came to light. News. Outlets buzzed with reports of the attempted sabotage, and support poured in for Laura and her team. Colonel Alan Brooks faced trial alongside other key members of the League. During the proceedings, Laura testified about the events leading up to the confrontation at the orbital station. Her words resonated with many, highlighting the dangers of fear-driven ideologies and the importance of embracing change. "We can't let fear dictate our future," she told the court, her voice strong and clear. "Progress isn't easy, and it isn't always comfortable, but it's necessary. If we turn our backs on it, we risk losing everything we've worked for." Her testimony struck a chord, inspiring widespread reforms within both military and civilian institutions. Policies were implemented to promote transparency and inclusivity, ensuring that incidents like this wouldn't happen again. For Laura, the victory was bittersweet. She had fought hard to protect the ideals she believed in, but the scars of the battle lingered. Still, she found solace in the knowledge that she hadn't fought alone. Daniel, Emily, and the rest of her team stood by her side, united in their commitment to a brighter future. One evening, after the dust had settled, Laura returned to her home. The yard was still littered with debris from the storm that had brought Greg and Steve to her doorstep weeks earlier. But this time she wasn't alone. Friends and allies gathered around her, helping clean up and rebuild. As she swept leaves into a pile, Laura paused to look at the faces of those who had supported her. In their eyes, she saw resilience, determination, and hope. And for the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Challenges would arise, and new battles would need to be fought. But Laura knew one thing, for certain. As long as there were people willing to stand together, humanity would find its way. The days following the exposure of the Vanguard League were a whirlwind of activity. News of the conspiracy spread like wildfire, igniting debates across the globe. Some praised Laura Hayes and her team as heroes who had saved humanity from tyranny, while others dismissed their actions as overreach, accusing them of exaggerating the threat posed by the League. Despite the mixed reactions, one thing was undeniable. The world now knew the truth about the dangers lurking in the shadows. For Laura, the aftermath was both rewarding and exhausting. She spent hours testifying before congressional committees, answering questions about the League's activities and defending the necessity of projects like Eclipse. Her words carried weight, not just because of her rank or expertise, but because of the conviction behind them. She spoke passionately about the importance of progress, emphasizing that humanity couldn't afford to let fear dictate its future. But even as she fought for transparency and reform, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that the fight wasn't truly over. The Vanguard League had been dismantled, its leaders arrested, and its plans thwarted, but ideologies like theirs didn't disappear overnight. Seeds of hatred and division remained, waiting for fertile ground to take root again. And Laura knew that vigilance would be key to preventing another crisis. Amid the chaos, Daniel and Emily remained steadfast allies. They helped Laura navigate the political fallout, offering advice and support whenever she needed it. Together, they worked to ensure that the lessons learned from this ordeal wouldn't be forgotten. New protocols were implemented to monitor classified projects, and stricter oversight measures were put in place to prevent similar breaches in the future. Still, Laura couldn't help but feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. The spotlight was intense, and every decision she made was scrutinized. Some criticized her for being too aggressive, while others accused her of not doing enough. It was a delicate balancing act, and sometimes it felt like no matter what she did, someone would find fault. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of testimony, Laura returned home to find Daniel waiting for her on her porch. He sat with his arms crossed, staring out at the horizon as the sun dipped below the trees. "You look like you could use a break," he said, glancing at her as she approached. Laura sighed, sinking onto the step beside him. "I don't think I'll ever get used to all this attention. It's exhausting." Daniel chuckled softly. "Yeah, well, that's what happens when you save the world. People tend to notice." "It's not funny," Laura muttered, though a hint of a smile tugged at her lips. I want things to go back to normal, but I know they won't. Not really." "No, they won't," Daniel admitted, his tone turning serious. "And maybe that's a good thing. Normal wasn't working. If we hadn't exposed the League, who knows how much damage they could have done. Sometimes change is messy, but it's necessary." Laura nodded slowly, gazing out at the yard where everything had begun. The debris from the storm had finally been cleared away, leaving the space tidy and peaceful. "I guess you're right, but it doesn't make it any easier." "Nothing worth doing ever is," Daniel replied. He hesitated for a moment, then added, "Listen, I know you've got a lot on your plate right now, but don't forget to take care of yourself. You've earned a little downtime." Laura smiled faintly. "Thanks, Daniel. I'll try." As the weeks passed, Life began to settle into a new rhythm. Public interest in the scandal gradually waned, allowing Laura to focus on rebuilding her routine. She threw herself into her work, channeling her energy into advancing initiatives like Eclipse. Progress was slow but steady, and each small victory reminded her why she had chosen this path in the first place. Still, there were moments when the memories of the past few months crept back in. Late at night, when the house was quiet and the world outside seemed distant, Laura found herself replaying the events in her mind. The confrontation with Greg and Steve, the tense standoff at the orbital station, the chilling presence of Colonel Brooks. It all felt so vivid, as if it had happened yesterday. One such night, unable to sleep, Laura wandered into her study and pulled out a folder containing documents related to the case. She flipped through the pages, studying the names and faces of those involved in the conspiracy. Each one represented a piece of the puzzle, a reminder of how close humanity had come to disaster. Her eyes lingered on a photo of Colonel Brooks, his cold stare sending a shiver down her spine. Even behind bars, he remained a symbol of the resistance they faced, a force driven by fear and prejudice. Laura wondered if he truly believed in the cause he had championed, or if he had simply been using it to further his own ambitions. Either way, his actions had left scars that would take time to heal. Closing the folder, Laura leaned back in her chair and stared at the ceiling. She thought about the sacrifices she had made, not just during this ordeal, but throughout her career. Every promotion, every accolade had come at a cost. There were missed opportunities, strained relationships, and countless sleepless nights. Yet despite it all, she had never regretted her choices. Because deep down, she knew she was fighting for something greater than herself. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Emily peeked her head in, holding 2 steaming mugs of tea. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, stepping inside without waiting for an answer. Laura gestured toward the chair across from her. "Of course, thanks." Emily handed her a mug and settled into the seat, sipping her tea thoughtfully. "Couldn't sleep either?" "Something like that," Laura replied, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "Just thinking about everything that's happened." Emily nodded, her expression understanding. "It's a lot to process, but you should be proud of what you've accomplished. You stood up to people who wanted to drag us backward, and you didn't back down. That takes guts." Laura smiled faintly. "I didn't do it alone. None of us did." "No, but you led the charge," Emily countered. "And that matters. People look up to you, Laura. They see you as proof that it's possible to overcome obstacles and make a difference. Don't underestimate the impact you've had." The words struck a chord, lifting some of the heaviness Laura had been carrying. She realized that while the battle against the Vanguard League had been difficult, it had also inspired others to stand up for what they believed in. Change wasn't achieved overnight, but every step forward counted. In the weeks that followed, Laura began to embrace her role as a leader and advocate for progress. She gave speeches at conferences, sharing her experiences and urging others to remain vigilant against forces that sought to divide humanity. She also worked tirelessly to promote inclusivity within the military, ensuring that individuals from diverse backgrounds had equal opportunities to succeed. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. Support poured in from unexpected places, including colleagues who had once doubted her abilities. Even critics softened their stance, acknowledging the importance of her contributions. Slowly but surely, Laura's vision of a brighter future began to take shape. Of course, challenges remained. Resistance to change was inevitable, and there were still those who clung to outdated ideologies. But Laura refused to let setbacks deter her. With Daniel and Emily by her side, she continued to push forward, determined to create a world where everyone, regardless of gender, race, or background, could thrive. One afternoon, as she stood on her porch watching the sunset, Laura felt a sense of peace wash over her. The road ahead was long, and there would undoubtedly be more battles to fight. But for the first time in a long while, she felt hopeful. Hopeful that humanity could rise above its flaws and choose a path of unity and progress. Because in the end, that's what it was all about. Not power, not glory, but the belief that together they could build a better tomorrow. Months had passed since the exposure of the Vanguard League, and life on Earth had begun to settle into a new rhythm. The scandal had sparked widespread reforms, both within the military and across civilian institutions. Policies promoting transparency, inclusivity, and accountability became standard practice, ensuring that incidents like the one Laura faced wouldn't happen again. Yet despite these changes, Laura Hayes knew the fight for progress was far from over. Every morning, she woke up to a world still grappling with its flaws. News reports highlighted ongoing struggles, pockets of resistance against reform, protests fueled by fear of change, and whispers of underground groups determined to revive ideologies like those of the Vanguard League. But alongside these challenges were stories of hope, communities coming together, young leaders stepping forward, and advancements in technology that promised a brighter future. For Laura, this duality was a constant reminder of why her work mattered. She continued to push boundaries, advocating for projects like Eclipse and championing causes that aligned with her vision of unity and progress. Her role as a leader grew increasingly important, not just within the military but also as a public figure inspiring others to embrace change. One crisp autumn morning, Laura received an unexpected invitation. A global summit on human advancement was being held in Geneva, Switzerland, bringing together scientists, politicians, activists, and innovators from around the world. The organizers requested her presence, asking her to deliver the keynote speech. It was an honor, but also a responsibility, one she accepted without hesitation. As the date of the summit approached, Laura spent countless hours preparing her remarks. She wanted her message to resonate, to remind people of the importance of standing together in the face of adversity. Drawing from her own experiences, she crafted a speech that was equal parts personal and universal, a call to action for anyone who believed in the power of collaboration and courage. The day of the summit arrived, and Laura found herself standing backstage at the Grand Conference Hall. The room buzzed with energy as attendees mingled, exchanging ideas and forging connections. Peering through the curtain, Laura spotted familiar faces, Daniel and Emily among them, alongside strangers, whose names she recognized from headlines and research papers. It was a gathering of dreamers and doers, united by a shared commitment to shaping a better future. When her name was called, Laura stepped onto the stage, greeted by polite applause. As she approached the podium, she took a moment to survey the audience. Hundreds of eyes stared back at her, filled with curiosity and anticipation. Taking a deep breath, she began to speak. "Good morning," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I stand before you today not as a hero, but as someone who has seen firsthand what happens when fear and division take hold. I've faced threats, intimidation, and attempts to silence me because of who I am and what I represent. And yet here I am, still standing, still fighting." She paused, letting her words sink in. "What happened to me wasn't unique. Countless others have faced similar challenges, simply for daring to believe in a better tomorrow, for wanting to break free from outdated systems and build something new. That's why we're here today, to ensure that no one else has to endure what so many of us have already faced." Laura went on to share details of her ordeal, describing the confrontation with Greg and Steve, the infiltration of the orbital station, and the eventual takedown of the Vanguard League. She spoke candidly about the fear she had felt, the doubts that had crept in, and the strength she had drawn from her team and allies. Her story resonated deeply, earning nods of agreement and murmurs of support from the crowd. "But let me be clear," she continued, her tone firm. "This isn't just my story, it's our story. Each of you has played a part in moving humanity forward, whether you realize it or not. Every discovery, every act of kindness, every moment of courage, it all adds up. Together we can create a world where everyone has a seat at the table, where diversity isn't feared but celebrated, where progress isn't stifled but embraced." Her final words carried a note of urgency. We can't afford to wait. The challenges we face are too great, and the stakes are too high. If we turn our backs on each other now, we risk losing everything we've worked for. So I ask you, Will you join me? Will you stand with me and fight for a future worth believing in? The room erupted in applause, the sound echoing off the walls. As Laura stepped away from the podium, tears welled in her eyes as she looked out at the sea of faces, illuminated by smiles and cheers. In that moment, she felt a profound sense of connection, a shared purpose that transcended borders, backgrounds, and beliefs. After the speech, Laura mingled with attendees, answering questions and engaging in lively discussions. Many expressed gratitude for her courage, while others shared their own stories of struggle and triumph. Among them was a young woman named Maya, a scientist working on sustainable energy solutions. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Laura couldn't help but feel inspired by her passion. "You're amazing," Maya said, shaking Laura's hand. "Your speech reminded me why I started doing this work in the first place." "Thank you," Laura smiled warmly. "Thank you. People like you give me hope. Keep going. You're making a difference." By the end of the summit, Laura felt reinvigorated. The conversation she'd had, the connections she'd made, and the renewed sense of purpose she carried home with her. All of it reinforced her belief in the power of collective effort. Change might be slow, but it was happening, and she was proud to be part of it. Back at her house, life returned to a semblance of normalcy. Laura resumed her daily routines, finding comfort in the familiarity of her surroundings. Yet, there was a noticeable shift in her outlook. The scars of the past, few months remained, but they no longer weighed her down. Instead, they served as reminders of how far she had come and how much farther she could go. One evening, as she sat on her porch watching the stars twinkle above, Daniel and Emily joined her. They brought snacks and drinks, turning what could have been a quiet night into a small celebration. "To surviving," Daniel said, raising his glass, "and to building something better." "To surviving," Emily echoed, clinking her glass against his. Laura smiled, joining in the toast. "To surviving and thriving." They laughed and talked late into the night, sharing stories and dreams for the future. For Laura, it was a perfect moment, a reminder of the friendships that had sustained her through the darkest times. As she looked at Daniel and Emily, she realized that none of this would have been possible without them. Their unwavering support had been her anchor, keeping her grounded when the storms raged. Eventually, the conversation turned to the road ahead. "What's next for you?" Emily asked, leaning back in her chair. Laura thought for a moment, gazing at the horizon. "I don't know exactly, but whatever it is, I'll keep pushing forward. There's still so much work to be done." "And we'll be right there with you," Daniel added, giving her a reassuring nod. "Always?" Laura felt a lump rise in her throat. "Thanks, I couldn't ask for better friends or better teammates." The three of them sat in comfortable silence, enjoying the cool breeze and the peacefulness of the night. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and crickets chirped softly in the grass. It was a simple moment, but one that spoke volumes about resilience, friendship, and hope. As the night wore on, Laura reflected on everything she had endured. From the day 2 rogue officers confronted her in her yard to the global summit where she inspired hundreds, her journey had been anything but ordinary. But through it all, she had discovered something profound. The strength to overcome adversity didn't come from within alone. It came from leaning on others, trusting in shared values, and believing in the possibility of a brighter tomorrow. In the end, Laura Hayes wasn't just a soldier or a leader. She was a symbol of hope, a testament to the idea that even in the face of hatred and fear, humanity could choose to rise above. And as long as there were people willing to stand together, the future would always be worth fighting for.